Yeah, I think it's the impact of Storm Eowyn beginning to come in. So it's beginning to feel it here in the Hebrides.
We're just discussing that actually, yeah. Not knowing what's coming tomorrow is what the forecast is. Yeah. All right. We've admitted everyone from the waiting room. Hopefully everyone's managed to sink in. Quick reminders. First of all, can you please ensure you should have been muted when you came in? Obviously later, please remember to unmute if you'd like to speak or called upon. So welcome everyone to this very important meeting on albinism in Malawi, hosted by the Scotland-Malawi Partnership, but in collaboration with many partners today who will be presenting and offering some of their learnings during the event. You'll find a link in the chat box in a moment to the program for today, the loose program, and hopefully we'll have plenty of time for other attendees to offer any contributions or ask any questions once we've gone through those. Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Chad Morse. I'm the Deputy CEO here at the Scotland-Malawi Partnership. A few other housekeepings I do want to mention is, as is with all our events at the Scotland-Malawi Partnership, this actually isn't hybrid, but purely online. We will be recording the meeting from now. And we'll upload this meeting onto our past events page I know there's several people who would have liked to attend that weren't available this morning. So they'll be able to watch back the video and listen to the conversations and contributions. As I said, if you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat box and make any connections. The chat box will also be uploaded to our past events page. So if you want to refer back to it from any conversations there, any direct messaging you do via Zoom will not be recorded and we don't have access to that. So if you're having a side chat with any colleagues, then that will not be shared, obviously. The resources that will be shared today will also be on our past events page, and you'll receive an email shortly after this meeting with a link to the event once we get it uploaded. And you also have a small request to complete a very short survey that we really do appreciate in terms of our reporting on what you thought of the meeting and to help us improve these meetings. I think that's enough in terms of housekeeping. Several months ago now, Chris from SCIAF reached out to the Scotland-Malawi Partnership and asked if potentially the SMP members would be interested in some of the work they've been doing collaboratively with their partners in Malawi on albinism, and we said, of course. Alita Chidimba, who is well known to the Scotland-Malawi Partnership, we knew that she'd been doing some research in the area as well, so pulled her in and we started our preliminary chats on trying to design the program today, reaching out to colleagues at University of Glasgow and other partners in Malawi to kind of put the program together. Just because we have some presentations from different individuals today, as I said, later, please feel free to ask any questions or share any of your experiences yourselves with the group. I'm going to hand directly over to Chris, who, like I said, contacted us at the SMP. And we're grateful for that, to kind of put the program together. For a few opening comments, he has said that he is tethering off his phone today, so hopefully his Wi-Fi holds on that. So Chris, over to you if you don't mind.
Great, thanks so much, Chad, and thanks to everybody and welcome to the session. I think one of the confusing things about the session is that there's two Chris's and two Tuntus, and we got a bit confused about all of that, but we finally got it together and worked out which Chris is which and which Tuntu is which. So yeah, as Chad said, I think that this session came from a shared concern and a shared commitment to working with persons with albinism and at different stages in life, and we're aware that the stigma and the discrimination that affects people with albinism in Malawi starts from birth, and it affects life chances and opportunities and participation in society at every level. So when I spoke to Chad and Stuart about this, it was there seemed to be a very spontaneous interest and spontaneous energy, you know, to talk about this issue. And I think it's particularly important this year when we have the presidential elections coming up. And unfortunately, in Malawi, the incidence of discrimination and violence and risk to persons with albinism in an election year is sometimes worse. So it seems like a good time to discuss it. And so in this session, we're very, very privileged to have Bonface with us, who is the Commissioner for the Malawi Human Rights Commission. And alongside Bonface, we're going to have contributions from practitioners who work at different levels and researchers who work at different levels, looking at how we can best support persons with albinism at different stages in life. So my colleague, Tuntu Simwimba, is the Programme Officer from CCJP, which is the Catholic Commission for Justice and Peace. And just while I'm talking about him, I'd like to say congratulations, Tuntu, because I understand that you had a baby daughter a few days ago, or your wife did. So just to say congratulations. Thanks for making it after that. So Tuntu and I worked together for over a year, and I've been running last year, which is very, it's a project which really works with families and individuals and brings together people to look at socioeconomic rights and access to socioeconomic rights, but also work those in terms of their vocational training, so they can improve their own chances in life through gaining skills and education. And we're then going to ask Elita to give us an overview of her research, which will look more at the experiences of children in education and the challenges and possible solutions to some of those challenges. And then we'll go on to talk to hear from Bonface, who'll talk directly about how we can confront discrimination and promote equity. Then we have the second Tuntu, who will be joined by Dr. Chris Hand and Dr. Paul Lynch from the University of Glasgow. And their focus will be on exploring freedom and human rights of children and young persons with albinism in the central region of Malawi, drawing from their own research. Following that, we'll have enough time to have hopefully quite a substantial discussion, which all of the participants are welcome to contribute to with comments and suggestions and questions to the presenters. So I think we can now move on to ask Tuntu to start with his presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. Like Chris has mentioned, my name is Tuntufye Simwimba. I work with the Catholic Commission for Justice and Peace. Interestingly, I engaged CCJP when I was doing my own research at the peak of the murders of persons with albinism. I engaged them because I wanted to collect some data, but they were interested in the approach. So eventually they told me to come and to be their researcher. And eventually now I work with the Catholic Commission for Justice and Peace. Perhaps just to give a bit of context on what I will present, I first want to reflect back a bit on the issues that happened in 2014. Then I will try to rationalize the causes in terms of the treatment of persons with albinism. Then I'll later go to the impact, the systemic impact that we've had. And later I will discuss the socio-economic issue. I was given 10 minutes to do this task, which eventually is not a lot of time. So it allowed me to go deeply into the issues. So like Chris has mentioned, perhaps you should have also appreciated from the concept notes. A lot of murders happened, a lot of murders from 2014 to now. 200 people have experienced some attacks, abductions and killings in Malawi, especially in the light of them being persons with albinism. And a reflection on those issues, they are superstition driven because people think albinism, people with albinism are a source of money. Sometimes they think they may bring bad luck, sickness or death. Sometimes they are thought of to be able to cure HIV and AIDS. and sometimes they think their body parts can be used to catch fish, and some consider them to be a source of good luck. These murders that happened in 2014 eventually brought in, most of them happened from 2014 to 2019. Eventually the government was caught unaware, and eventually they came in to respond to these murders, to deal with them. And what we saw very much, then I was studying for my law degree, I found out that the law was quite unprepared, and I think which was also very obvious to the government. And we saw the government trying to go in overdrive, trying to amend a couple of laws. They amended the Anatomy Act. They introduced new offenses such as trespass at graveyards, grave tampering, unlawful possession of human tissue, exhumation of human corpse, extraction of human tissue, and eventually they also tried to increase the penalties to some of these offenses. Some of them are now hold life imprisonment. However, these reforms happened because it was in response, or they were reactive in nature. And the question that perhaps we should start asking ourselves is, are these reforms enough? Is this segregation against the people of albinism continuing? Could we do more as a government or as a people in terms of empowering persons with albinism? When they happened in 2014, there were several schools of thoughts. Some people said the cause of these issues was because it was just a domino effect, because the murders didn't happen in Malawi. Malawi was not an isolated case then. Some murders had happened in Tanzania the previous years, and they went on to Mozambique and Malawi. So some people believe it was just a domino effect that eventually came into our country. But there are some people who say it just happened. You know, once in a while, people start to believe something, and eventually it went, and eventually it passed. But for me, I belong into the third school of thoughts, where I believe that there are deep societal issues that need eventually to be interrogated. So if we are looking at them as deep societal issues, we should look at them in a broader context. The question that we might want to ask ourselves is, could this problem might have come from the pre-colonial era? Or could it have come from the colonial era? Then maybe we should also reflect on the post-colonial era. If you look at the pre-colonial era, there's no much literature against when it comes to the discriminations against persons with albinism. However, we can trace back through the use of language. When you look into Malawi and you try to look for an ordinary name of persons with albinism, a very specific name of persons with albinism, I have done a bit of correction of names, and eventually all of them, I find issues with them. One of them is called Nzungudalo, which means a fake white person. Kachikule, which means a yellow pumpkin. Napwere, which means an ripened tomato. And now, after the murders, there is a new term called mammalian, which simply means millions. Which they call them because people can sell their body parts and get millions. And when they see a person with albinism, they say, that's a million over there. And there is generally, we borrow from the English language, generally albino, which if you look at it is not politically sensitive now that we are going towards a person with albinism. So if you reflect on those terms, which trace back to the pre-colonial era, they tell a big story, which simply means that one, there has been a misunderstanding of persons with albinism. It also reflects that eventually there have also been issues of discrimination of persons with albinism. Sometimes even you get a nuance of mockery against persons with albinism. So which to me eventually says that we might have the issues that we are seeing now come from a pre-colonial era, but they have subsisted. Now, if you get to the colonial era, we might have to reflect more, because the colonial era also brought in a bit of issues, because you remember that as a country, most of our laws are transplanted from, taken from the English legal system. Even in the English legal system itself, we usually mention a term: you cannot transplant an English oak tree, because an English oak tree only grows in England. Eventually, nowhere can it develop. And with that, we are seeing that because we transplanted a law into the Malawian context, when it got into Malawi, even in the colonial era, most of the issues that were to do with beliefs, eventually they were taken off. That comes in the ruling out of the witchcraft beliefs by the Witchcraft Act, or anything to do with superstition. So eventually, the law could not address these issues. That's the reason why in 2014, when these issues started emanating, it eventually became a crisis. If we move to the post-colonial era, there are a lot of issues that we might want to reflect over, because the post-colonial era is where we see a spate of killings, much as we identify the 2014 ones, which were tied to an election then. We can see that in almost every election era period, you find that there are some sort of murders happening. Eventually, there were Chirobwe murders. Then in 2009, we also saw cutting of press. There was a issue of a serial killer called Nachipanti, who was killing all these people. And most of them were not persons with albinism, but eventually, could it be that persons with albinism are part of this series of murders? Because when you also look at some of the cases that have to do with persons with albinism, especially the Masambuka case, which eventually you find that there is reference to politicians. There's another one where one of the suspects died in police custody, Blair Lule, eventually is tied to politicians. Could it be that these myths are eventually fueled by politicians? As Chris has already mentioned, these issues get worse during the election period. So while we look at these problems throughout these phases, my understanding, what I'm postulating is that these abuses come from a lot of issues. We cannot isolate where they are coming from, but there are a lot of issues that eventually have led to the abuse of persons with albinism. And what we also see is that in these issues eventually have manifested in our structures. For example, the access to health for persons with albinism, issues of sunscreen lotion only became only got into the essential healthcare package when the murders and people happened and people started advocating. Amnesty International is also to the data that 30% of cases of persons with albinism are 30% slower, which also points to access to justice. Disaster responsiveness is also a problem for persons with albinism, because there are not such specified packages for people with albinism who have gone through such crises. Then there is a gender component of each. HIV rapes of women and children, and eventually, if you look at the physical build-up of men and women, eventually it's easier to abduct a woman and a girl than a man. So these also are issues that we also see. In one of the projects that we had in Baraka and Mangochi, the issues that eventually came in is that even persons with albinism, especially women, find it very hard to get into marriages. So this also points to the structural segregation which these abuses eventually get into. Then there's the issue of housing and socioeconomic disadvantage. As Chris mentioned, we have looked at our entry points in terms of persons with albinism. And our understanding is that much as the segregation point to legal inefficiency or structural inefficiency, but eventually socioeconomic issues are a great component. And that's the reason why we have the project in Zomba and Machinga, where we're addressing issues on persons with albinism. In our approach, we are looking at socioeconomic issues as central. But eventually, we also think that as somebody who has good socioeconomic welfare will eventually get the attraction, people who interact with the person more and to gain more respect in the community. And these disadvantages in terms of health, safety, and others will eventually fall off. And with that approach, we have gone into a project of 3 years, which we had a pilot of a year or so. We are looking at development of the skills of persons with albinism. This is because we also understand that most of these have suffered through a lot of disadvantage to a point of that they couldn't participate well in school because of poor eyesight. Some of our schools here, area schools, you learn under trees, which are eventually not conducive for persons with albinism in terms of skin care. So our interventions much as targeted at somebody who is 18 and above, or sometimes we're looking at a guardian of a person with albinism, so that we empower these people and eventually they get to there. So in our approach towards the development of their skills, we are looking at the artisanal approach and the vocational school approach. Artisanal approach, where people in a community, somebody with a specific art can be paired with a person with albinism to be taught that skill. Eventually, they will be able to sustain themselves. After they learn that skill, we teach them how to develop a business, because we know that a skill alone is not important. It would be important, but you might want to beef it up so that this person is truly independent. So in that way, we are linking them to microloans, to VSLs, and we also have a revolving fund that persons with albinism or guardians of persons with albinism or parents can borrow from, so that they can beef up their business. This is also we are also doing some lessons in terms of them to be empowered with business skills, how to create a budget, how to ensure that they're making profit, and such initiatives. When we have developed their businesses, we are going into another stage, which is village savings and loans, because now you have the funds, and we think that these funds should be able to be saved so that you can invest more and you can uplift more your family. Then we move to the last phase, which is mentorship. We understand that once somebody is socio-economically empowered, should be able to mentor others. And we are linking the people that have gone through our program to people who are starting in the program. While we are doing all this cycle, we are also looking now at the holistic needs, issues such as their protection, their access to justice, and these other issues, which eventually has proved to be an effective way of dealing with persons with albinism. And eventually we are getting a lot now of demand on people to be enrolled in the program. But because of the limitation of funds, we are working only in 63 in Zomba, 3 in Machinga. I am not sure if I've gone through past my time. Otherwise, thank you very much. I've rushed through this thing. Yeah.
Thank you, Tuntu. That was, I think it was really important to get your thoughts on the history, the cultural background, which many of us not fully understand, and I think it was really important to get that, and then to go on to the description of the project, and how that responds to the different levels of discrimination and disadvantage that people with albinism experience. So just to move on swiftly, we'll now move on to ask Alita Chamdimba, who's going to focus on her research. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to try to screen. I hope everybody can see it. Can I get a thumbs up or someone affirming that? Okay, great. I see that thumbs up. Thank you. So yes, as Chris mentioned, I'm Elita Jamdimba, and I'm from the School of Social Work and Social Policy at the University of Strathclyde. My PhD research focuses on the broader lived experiences of children and young persons with albinism in Malawi. However, for today, I'll focus largely on findings around their education experiences. Now, for my study, one of the main kind of objectives was really to understand how children and young people with albinism develop a sense of belonging, whether in their families, whether in their schools or in their communities, and to understand some of the barriers that actually hinder that belonging, as well as the enablers that support it. And it was also an important objective for my study to really center the voices of children and young people. Several studies have been done with persons with albinism. However, a lot of them are with adults or are, they rely on the voices of teachers or of key informants. But it was important for me to really understand experiences of children with albinism from their own lens and their daily experiences. And so to keep that sort of participatory approach in kind of amplifying young people's voices, I used an approach that worked closely with the Association of Persons with Albinism, and the association came into the study as a research advisory group. They played a really key role in ensuring that the objectives of the study, the participatory nature was really embodied because they informed, different decisions such as the study sites, such as refining the data collection tools and ensuring that safeguarding was really very key and kept to the top level throughout the study. And that was very important. And this basically happened from March to June of 2023. And then later I had follow-up interviews in February of 2024. But the nice thing is that the research advisory group was actually able to validate the data during a validation workshop in June. So, in total, 85 participants took part in the study. But like I said, because the main aim was to amplify the voices of children and young people, the majority of the participants were children and young persons with albinism aged 3 years old to 23 years old. And then other participants were, their family members, their friends, and also key informants within the Ministry of Education and other ministries. Again, keeping with that very strong participatory nature of this study, I applied participatory visual methods to this research, particularly drawing and poetic inquiry as data collection tools. And this, again, was important because, as I mentioned, my study was with children, and I really wanted to ensure that they were comfortable and open to express their experiences, especially even some of the barriers that they face in their everyday experiences. And this resulted in very rich findings with a variety of themes that ensued from discussions from some of their drawings and some of their poems. So, the general themes really touched on issues to do with belonging, unsafety and safety. As Tuntu mentioned, he really gave a great sort of background to the everyday experiences of persons with albinism in Malawi and how safety is actually a really vital aspect that cannot be ignored. Other findings in my study also really highlighted issues to do with disparities between urban-based and rural-based welfare of persons with albinism. Their experiences are different. But today, like I said, I'll focus more so on findings around education settings, particularly primary and secondary education. So around, school settings, particularly classrooms, the conversation of low and visual impairments was very, it came up. It was something that emerged as a key finding. There wasn't one child in my study who did not talk about the challenges that they face in negotiating visual impairments. And something, to highlight, especially because I was exploring barriers and supports, was really the role of peers and of teachers within classroom settings in Malawi. Now, when learners with albinism, talked about some of the ways that they feel included and accommodated in classrooms, a lot mentioned that having a teacher who was willing to adjust, how they taught and how they engaged and how they ensured that a learner with albinism has access to the curriculum was very important. And the sort of adjustments are actually inexpensive and, very doable adjustments, but really depend more so on the attitude of teachers in schools. So adjustments such as having, writing with the larger handwriting on the chalkboard so that learners with albinism are able to see better, or even within schools that have resource center or have, special needs schools within the Malawi education system, having opportunities to learn the Braille alphabet or having, academic resources presented and printed in a larger font was very important. So having a large font textbook or having exam papers printed in larger font, these are the kind of adjustments that children said they needed and they appreciated in their schools. Interestingly enough, my findings showed that these adjustments were more likely in schools that were tailored to learners with special needs. So, for example, schools for blind children or schools for, that had a resource center that was really tailored toward meeting learners with special needs. The mainstream setting, however, was less inclined to accommodate children with albinism. And various students mentioned experiences that were quite negative with teachers. And this really highlights, the issue that the awareness around albinism and albinism-related needs is still a gap in Malawi. And it's still an area that requires attention, especially within the education setting. And if we think about the mainstream setting, which is where we want children and young people with albinism to be fully included and, participating, then we need to think about the attitudes and the knowledge, the awareness of teachers in those settings. Another key finding was, in mainstream schools, especially primary schools in Malawi, where there's a really large teacher-to-learner ratio, children with albinism found themselves sitting at the back of the class, not close enough to the chalkboard or not close enough to good lighting, which made it even more challenging for them to navigate visual impairments. I'm trying to go to the next slide. I don't know why it's not going. There we go. So, when we think about the education setting, we also have to remember that school belonging or schooling is beyond the classroom. And that's something that really came out in my study, because during the participatory workshop, there were two girls who drew football fields. And when I asked them to explain, what does this mean? One of the girls, or both of them, said, I've drawn my football field with trees around it because I want trees, to protect me from the shade when I'm playing outside. And another girl drew a fence, and she said the same, that, there's a longing to play outside with her peers, but then because of, skin challenges associated with albinism and sun exposure, then, there's that barrier of that outdoor participation. And I think this is something important to highlight, because the Ministry of Education in Malawi, as well as the Ministry of Health, are really investing in the skin health of children with albinism through dermatology clinics, as well as through the free provision of sunscreen. But very, very rarely have they considered how to adjust school environments so that children with albinism are accommodated and are engaging even in outdoor activities because they want to have a full kind of education and schooling experience. But if you are only going to a classroom and you can't play with your friends outside, then you're excluded. So that's, again, a conversation that's worth really highlighting. How are we including children with albinism so that they have a very full and inclusive and holistic schooling experience beyond the classroom? Again, beyond the classroom, issues of bullying really came out. Tuntu highlighted that very well when you spoke about issues of language, issues of labeling and stigma. You know, language and stigma and labels are very closely connected, and language is also very closely connected to representation. How you talk about somebody, the words you use toward them says a lot about how they are socially represented. And my findings showed that even at the very peer-to-peer level within schools, the representation of children with albinism needs a lot of work. There's so much area for improvement. A lot of the children in my study talked about being bullied. And there's a very sort of gender dynamic to the bullying as well. And, issues to do with boys kind of being more violently bullied, and then girls experiencing more labeling and that kind of stigma and exclusion. So it was quite interesting to see the different dynamics and how bullying occurred. And a key gap was that particularly government mainstream schools don't really have strong anti-bullying policies in place. Neither do they have strong reporting mechanisms for the children with albinism to bring up, the issues that they're going through and to be supported. What I did find as a key support was the role of family. So the family environment actually played a really key supporting role in empowering children with albinism, building their self-esteem, giving them positive labels, while the community gave negative derogatory labels. In families, children with albinism are accepted. I recognize that this is not in all families. There are some families where children with albinism have experienced rejection, but for where they were accepted, they actually were able to exercise more agency and more resilience outside the family in school settings because of that very strong foundation at the very micro level. And so that's also something worth recognizing. To what extent are we leveraging strong micro level systems to actually build or to actually continue to support and extend beyond the home, especially in situations where children with albinism are well supported by their family and well supported by their parents. I'm going to stop there because I think I'm out of time. But thank you very much. And this is a movie recommendation on Netflix, very connected to some of the findings that I've shared if you are interested in watching it.
Thank you so much for that very, very informative and emphatic presentation with a lot of recommendations as well in there. So great, we've kept that much for that. So just in the interest of time, I think we'll just keep on going. And I'd like to invite Bonface Massah, the Commissioner for the Malawi Human Rights Commission, to address us now.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you very much, Edita and Tuntu. Yeah, I think it's good to speak now after the two great presenters. I'll be sharing my experience on 2 or 3 capacities. First, I think if we see the 2 presentations, they have really focused much on the how do we restore the brokenness that is there in our society when we talk about rights of people with albinism. But also, if we reflect on the 2 presentations, we look at how do we recover from those setbacks? And I think that's the purpose of this session, where we try now to look at how do we promote an inclusive OH generation for people with albinism. So coming from a background of a human rights institution, but also I'll share my experience on the work that I've been doing as a civil society organization through standing voice through the Association of Persons with Albinism, but also the work that we'll be doing through the Africa Albinism Network. So as a national human rights institution, the major focus has been really trying to understand what is albinism from a human rights-based approach. If we look at the broader definition of disability from the UN Convention, you literally see that it has several parameters, and one of them is talk about color, it talks about stigma, and I think that's the angle where we have tried to look at albinism from a human rights point of view, because by definition, albinism it's a genetic condition, but it has so many layers. It affects our eyes, it affects our skin, and it affects our hair, and then there's that layer of discrimination that we also experience. Secondly, is now to start to unpack that. The work that we have been doing as an NHI in Malawi has been really trying to focus on why people with albinism have been targeted. The first thing is to acknowledge that any killing, any human rights violation has to be condemned. And when the attack started in Malawi, the first entry was to do a public inquiry, engaged in investigations, but also participating in awareness raising around the human rights violation that was happening. So trying to understand why this pattern has just started, but also trying to look at what interventions can we provide as a human rights institution. That was very important because at that stage, when Chris was presenting, it was at the peak of the killings of people with albinism in sub-Saharan region. So we had serious attacks in Tanzania, Malawi, pockets of attacks in Mozambique, Zambia, and other African countries. So as an HI, we need to understand why this has just shifted to Malawi, or was it already happening in Malawi? So the intervention was focusing on understanding the patterns, trying to understand what rights are directly being affected and how do we respond to, for example, right to life, torture, issues of access, right to health, as highlighted, issues of right to education. So looking at all these killings and attacks, how they have affected the enjoyment of human rights by persons with albinism, by their guardians, and also by their parents. So that was our first entry. Secondly, we are trying to understand what interventions are being applied to respond to these killings, to these human rights violations. So looking at the laws as they were highlighted, what is our constitution saying about the people with albinism, the Disability Act, the Gender Equality Act, access to information. So also the whole issue of the criminal justice system as Tuntu presented. Our authorities have adequate measures to respond to these attacks. So that pillar helped us a lot now to hide being involved in actual investigation of cases of attacks. The famous Blair Lule case, we have seen, we had an independent investigation of the human rights institution into the whole murder case of Blair Lule under police custody. We also looked at issues of superstitions, but also issues of the involvement of parents in this killing. Trainings of police prosecutors, magistrates, and investigators around the whole issues of killings of people with albinism, at least to strengthen the criminal justice system actors and also the response within the criminal justice system. Second, I think, is to understand the whole issue of killings from who are the rights holders. How much awareness is there amongst persons with albinism themselves to defend and demand their rights? So the whole issue of accountability was also one key thing that as a human rights institution, we are focusing on. How do we make sure that we have a voice through the association, through individuals who are human rights defenders to speak for themselves and to demand their rights? So it's a very critical pillar about responses to this killing, because if you have an organization or you have a voice that is compromised, it will be so difficult for state to respond to such killings, because there's that layer of the criminal nature of these killings. There's now harmful practices, but also for the case of Malawi and most African contexts, these killings are happening in our homes, where the issue of trust, the issues of our relatives involved, our mothers, our uncles, our daddies involved, there's a lot of evidence around that. So we really need to have rights holders, people with albinism themselves who know their rights, who can defend their rights and their voice is not compromised when they are speaking about the ritual killings and harmful practices around persons with albinism. So I think that's how our interventions as a Human Rights Commission have been, and also emphasizing on the response. That also helped us a lot to work with now government in terms of trafficking issues of border parts of people with albinism across Africa and across SADC, issues of intergovernmental relationship when you talk about the killings, understanding what is happening in Mozambique, in Zambia, in Tanzania, and then provide context for the Malawi government. The Commission has also been highly involved in the development of the National Action Plan, which is a very big tool when you talk about response to these killings. So we have a very big monitoring role, ensure that there are specific measures around the killings of people with albinism. So I'm sure majority of us maybe we have already access to the National Action Plan, but it's one of the critical tools that we have been championing and supporting to ensure that we respond to the attacks. It has pillars like access to health, security issues, interventions. We have seen government saying they are building houses for people with albinism. Those were all things that have been highlighted in the National Action Plan, and they are very critical in terms of holding our government accountable when we talk about specific measures to respond to the attacks as provided by the International Human Rights Instrument, but also the national legal frameworks when you talk about human rights-based response to attacks. My other experience I'll share from a civil society point of view, as I've said, the work that I've done through Standing Voice, the work that we're doing through APAM, and the work that we're doing also through the Africa Albinism Network. I think the most important lesson when you talk about promoting an inclusive future for all ages is just looking at organization like us, or organization of people with albinism. They must lead, they must be on the forefront in defending and promoting the rights of people with albinism. For me, that's, I think, the most critical part. So when you talk about self-representation of organization of people with disabilities or organization for people with disabilities, it is very critical to ensure that people with albinism themselves, they are at the core of that fight or of the work that we are doing. And working through this organization, one critical thing that I've learned is self-representation and also being self-aware. We understand our issues better. So even if I'm at a higher level, but I understand what it means to be tortured, what it means to be killed, what it means to have a friend with albinism who has been murdered, what it means to have a friend who has been displaced. And I think those experiences we should not undermine when we talk about response and creating a bright future. Because the work that we have been doing, for example, with Standing Voice, we have been looking at how do you support survivors and victims of torture. And this is, I think, the link that is still missing when we talk about responses to these attacks. So until we address these survivors, until we address the psychosocial needs of these victims, then we can claim to have a bright future of all ages. If we look at the data that is there around the killings and harmful practices, why more women have been attacked, why young people have been attacked, why men have been attacked, because this is a generation that we want to see having confidence, the generation that we want to see being empowered, the generation that we want to see active in economic activities, business, and also policy-making processes. And if we are not providing immediate psychosocial support, immediate interventions on their mental health, then we're only replicating the injustices that are there. So we are not addressing the future that we want. And I think this is what I would say is still missing. It's not just for Malawi, but I think also the work that I do with other countries, it's a huge gap that is missing when you talk about promoting an inclusive future for all ages. And that's where I think I would call for all of us to invest more. Start now understanding the psychosocial needs of the current generation, where there is fear, there is mistrust, there's disinformation. Then how do we invest in that piece to ensure that we create a future where people with albinism can enjoy their rights? Working from a civil society also angle, it has been very challenging getting ourselves positioned within the mainstream civil society space. How do we really position ourselves as an organization or civil society within the broader civil society space, for example, on climate change, women, GBV issues, youth organization-led, even within ourselves as the Organization of People with Disabilities. From the definition I mentioned about the UNCRPD definition, we work within the broader disability space and we operate as an organization of people with disabilities, but there's always a thin line and competition, misunderstanding, even within that broader disability space. And that has also been there. I've experienced it within the broader civil society organization. And it's two ways. Sometimes we have been overprotecting our space, but also sometimes we haven't been accommodated within the mainstream civil society space. So it's something I think that we need to reflect, but also define. Why I'm bringing this is I have also seen that if this is not handled carefully, in the process of claiming our self-representation in such space, we'll also lose focus. People with albinism will be killed forever. On the other hand, we may not have capacity to do everything as organizational people with disabilities. So that's one thing that I also want to highlight, and as I'm finished my talk. Yeah.
Bonface, thank you so much. And I think we realize that the incredible richness and importance of all of the things that all of the participants are saying makes this format limited in capturing everything. And but we're slightly ahead of the agenda. So thank you so much. And can we move on now to the next presenter? But I do really appreciate that there's so much there, and we haven't been able to capture all of it. But we'll. This will be recorded, and there'll be an opportunity for comments and suggestions after this. So thank you so much. And I think that your emphasis on psychosocial support, person-centered approaches, alongside all the legislative aspects and representation through civil society is extremely important. So I'll now pass over to Chris, Paul, and Tuntu for the final presentation before we move on to further comments and discussion. Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
So much.
I'm just going to quickly pass to Tuntu, who's going to start us off.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris, and thank you so much, Chris, as well. My name is Tuntufye Juma, working with Standing Voice. So my presentation is mainly on the a study to explore the freedoms and human rights for people with albinism in Malawi. So this study was done collaboratively with University of Glasgow, Standing Voice, the Ministry of Education, and also Malawi University of Business and Applied Studies. This is MOBAS. So the study was based on a background that in Malawi, albinism is still widely misunderstood. And because of that, people with those with this condition are at greater risk of physical and social violence, and this in the end impacts on their education and livelihood. And this is according to the UN 2094. In the past, the discussions have been there to mainly on the lack of protection for people with albinism, and that's what. And also, as Malawi, the Agenda 2026 also acknowledges that people with albinism have got the right to education, and there's the need to invest in the education of people with albinism. So the study had support from the University of Glasgow, and it's just a pilot to gather data and work towards developing a larger bit. It was a co-created method and multi-stakeholder approach. Co-created in the sense that whatever the study design was done with people with albinism, and the methods that were there, because we involved children with albinism, the methods were we didn't use one method. There are several methods that we used to collect data, and different stakeholders were involved in the collection of the data. So the research question that we tried to answer were three. The first one was, what are the challenges and opportunities facing today's children and young persons with albinism, and the implications for psychosocial well-being and education in 2030. The second one was, what is the level of albinism literacy among parents and caregivers? Because also this one also have got an impact on the education of children with albinism. So their level of understanding of albinism and for their children helps to understand children with albinism and their specific needs. And also the positive, what positive change can be achieved for multiple beneficiaries, because education for people with albinism cannot be done with one stakeholder. There are different stakeholders that need to be involved to ensure that there's positive change amongst persons with albinism. So the first visit that we did was to have a cooperation visit where University of Glasgow visited Malawi, and this was around June 2024. And this visit was about planning and also designing the study itself. So the planning meetings were held at Standing Voice Malawi, and this looked at the appropriate language that will be used in the data collection and the whole study, and also looking at the permissions from different stakeholders. We needed to have permission from Ministry of Education because this study was to be done in different schools and involving children with albinism. So during the visit, also schools were visited in Lilongwe and in Chinji, and meetings were conducted with different stakeholders. So during the study, we designed that we conduct 3 FGDs with teachers, and also one-to-one interviews with parents, and also FGDs with learners. And learners were also involved in completion of individual learning worksheets. We wanted to gather information from individual learners, so that's why they were involved in the individual learning worksheets. So what we present today, we only focus on the data from the individual learning worksheets. Next. So the learners that we involved were 26 learners. These learners were 11 females and 15 males, and the youngest learner was about 8 years, and the mean average age was 13 years. So you can see that the information was collected for learners that were still young and still in school. In terms of their biographies, out of the 26, 20 are primary school learners, 4 were Sunday school learners, and 1 vocational learner. So we had that cross-section of learners that we invoked. Next. Yeah, so for us to collect the data, we had different learner worksheets. We had one learner worked on section 1, which had 13 questions. And this learner worksheet had questions about various facets of life. So the various facets of life that we are looking at were particularly on schooling and social interaction. So many were looking at how the children were traveling to school, how they were making friends at school, and so on. And this worksheet had emojis that the learners had to take. The learners were oriented on how they can use the emojis and what each emoji means. And they were supported throughout the data collection, supported throughout the process, so that they take the actual emoji that depicts their feeling or their understanding of the different life aspects that they want to portray. Next. Then the second learner worksheet was on the same domains, and it also had 13 questions. But this one now focused on the valence and strength of feeling. And it also had the emojis. And these emojis were also, we added like a color code. But as I've said that we were interviewing children with albinism, and we wanted the data collection aspect to be more interesting and more for them to be like interested in the way they can express their feelings. So a color code was also added to the emojis. So that's just an example of how this worksheet was designed. Then the third one, the third section of learner worksheet, where the learners were supposed to rank the themes in terms of their importance. So the first ranking was about how they feel now that they're still in school or the current level of schooling that they are. Whilst the second ranking was about the next phase after they have completed this current stage of the schooling that they are in. So it was about ranking, and Let me say that throughout this data collection aspect, these learners were being supported to make sure that they rank according to how they feel and they express themselves according to how they feel and what they experience. Thank you. So the next part is about the findings, and this will be presented by Dr. Chris Hunt.
Thank you so much, Tuntu. Thank you. So to take us through the emotional rankings across the domains that we asked, we used emotions based on Ekman and Friesen's position on universal emotions. And there are a lot of successes and a lot of reasons to feel positive about what the learners were telling us. So across many domains, the dominant emotion that was felt was joy. Children were looking forward to traveling to school and making friends and learning and break time. So there was a lot of positivity in a number of these domains. Where there was more of a mixed picture or a slightly negative picture was around, and what we anticipated was around bullying and name calling, both in school and outside of school. There was a little bit of ambiguity about the importance or feelings around social media. Some people were kind of excited and looking forward to exploring themselves in a digital world. But again, one of the most important things was that these children had positive emotions, particularly around the schooling aspect of their daily lives. When we looked at the valence and direction of feeling, again, there are reasons to be cheerful. Children, learners with albinism, generally felt positive about making friends, about traveling to school, about participating in learning, about traveling home. But again, as anticipated, there was negative feeling around bullying and name calling. When we get to the rankings data, there's a few things that I want to point out. The way that this data has been summarized is based on which was the most frequent or common ranking choice for each domain, but also the average ranking and the spread of the rankings indicated by mean and standard deviation. So the top three, the medal positions, if you like, for the current themes and the current importances are schooling, friends, and family. And looking down the standard deviations column, there isn't a huge amount of spread in how far apart participant rankings are. They're reasonably tight. That suggests that there's quite a lot of agreement about which order these rankings should be put into. When we asked the learners with albinism to envision what would be important at the next stage of their journey, the next stage of their lives, education is still very, very valuable to these young people, but we see that work and health climb the rankings, particularly health. So there is an idea that these learners are looking ahead and perhaps being a little bit concerned about their future health and well-being. Another thing to pick up from the future themes is that the spread amongst the agreement or the increase of disagreement on in which order these things are ranked starts to increase. So in terms of the things that are clear and present and now, there's much more agreement and it's around the education, friends and family. But when these learners are asked to picture the next step of their journey, maybe 5 to 10 years, work and health are things that are on the horizons for these young persons with albinism. So to summarize, we do have reasons to be cheerful. Learners are feeling joyful about many aspects of their day-to-day life, particularly around education. But there are ambiguity and challenges around both bullying inside and outside of schools. What we need to think about now is how we translate and triangulate the data from the focus groups and from multiple stakeholders so that we get a synthesized and coherent story. We obviously need to disseminate this work in appropriate ways, such as through publications and conference proceedings. We don't want this to only go to a narrow audience. We want this to go far and wide. We will then, of course, take feedback from yourselves and other stakeholders to reflect on our methodologies, our materials, our procedures. And we will use that feedback along with our own reflections to try to secure next step funding. We focused on the central part of Malawi. We want to upscale to pan-Malawian research as a first step before potentially engaging in another review and reflection cycle, looking to do pan-regional upscaling. For example, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Mozambique. So I'll pass to Paul just to do some acknowledgement and some thanks. But on behalf of myself, I would like to thank you for your engagement.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thank you, Tuntu. I know we only got a minute. So just to emphasize that these are preliminary findings, we still got a lot of data that we need to transcribe and analyze in terms of the actual interviews and focus groups with the parent caregivers, the teachers, and the learners themselves. So we'll be able to find out, go into more detail about why they consider, say, health as a more important issue than education in the next few years. The whole purpose was to think ahead rather than the now. I think it's important. What has happened is that we have a lot of historical examples of young children and individuals with albinism having terrible experiences in their lives. And so we want to start thinking about their futures in terms of what's going to happen when they move into post-primary, into the work. So this is going to give a snapshot about what these individuals, these young people want to do, how they can participate in Malawian society, and indicate to the Ministry of Education what needs to be in place in terms of vocational education and other pathways. So I'll stop there and hand back to Chris. Thank you.
Yeah, I suppose my reaction to all of the presentations is kind of wow, because there's so much information with such strong recommendations and so many concrete examples of best practice. And it's been an amazingly difficult thing to do, to compress all of that. So thanks to all of the presenters to do that. So I think I'll hand over to Chad, if that's okay now, for a short open discussion. And then we'll have Stuart to sum up, because I think we're aiming to finish in about 20 minutes. But thanks so much to everybody, and I'll pass over to Chad for the open discussion, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you to all the presenters for your insights this morning. If anyone has any questions for any of the presenters or anything to offer to the meeting, maybe from your own perspective, I've noticed from the chat box, there's several different organizations represented there. If anybody would like to introduce themselves and briefly, in a minute, speak about your work. Hopefully we're all making connections within this meeting. I haven't noticed any direct questions in the chat box other than lots of praise for our presenters. And the floor is open. Eye on things. There we go. Anyone? Like we said, we did ask a lot of the presenters to condense their workings into 10 minutes, so I feel bad for that. I know they all could have passionately spoke for much longer, but we did want to have this space to be able to, Christine, please.
Yeah, thanks very much. And can I thank all the presenters? These were really helpful and informative and presentations. Let me just lower my hand. Question is, with the upcoming election, what is being done proactively to prepare, to protect, to try and diffuse any attacks that there might be as there's been in the past? Thanks.
Bonface, I don't know if you would like to address that question from the Human Rights Commission point of view, maybe, or anyone else?
Yeah, no, thank you. What I'm aware that two concrete steps that have been happening. Generally, this time around, we are privileged that through the NEC, our National Electoral Commission, there have been a serious focus around the support to persons with disabilities, and the issues of persons with albinism have been strongly highlighted within that grouping, and also consultations around the electoral process, persons with disabilities, and also persons with albinism. That has been, I think, addressed in terms of voting rights and participation. Participation in all levels, I think there's a positive step. I know we have also quite few candidates with albinism at the level of councillors and MPs this time around, which is a positive step, I think, for Malawi. The police have started raising awareness around the electoral process risks that are there and the attacks. Although it's not national campaigns, but we have seen efforts around that, and I think that's something that we can do more as a country, and also civil society organization partnering with the police to continuously raise awareness around the risks that could be there around attacks. APAM also started a docket tracing exercise, which is completed. So we have now new data around the pattern of attacks across Malawi. It's not yet published, but I was highly involved, and APAM was highly involved, and that also already gives us a pattern of the attacks and the threats that has been there as of 2024. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bonface, for addressing that. I don't know if any of the other presenters or anyone else would like to make a comment on upcoming elections or any initiatives, public awareness campaigns, or any other questions, of course. While you're thinking, I just want to note that we'll be putting it in the chat box now, but also once you receive the link after this meeting, there will be a link to a SCIAF video entitled "Fighting for Rights, Supporting People with Albinism in Malawi." We had a discussion before the meeting that it's a fantastic video, but we didn't want it to put people off attending because it's very comprehensive on the work that SCIAF have done with their partners in Malawi. So we'll share that link. Don't click it now. We're still in the meeting together, but it will also be sent via email after the meeting. But a very powerful video there that with more information, and we'll try to also note for those of you who have Netflix accounts, Alita's recommendation of the movie. Sorry, Alita, if you can remind me, Can You See Us? Was that the name of it?
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Chris.
Sorry, Christine, do you have another point there?
Yeah, maybe, I just wanted to supplement a bit on what the government is doing in terms of elections, what is happening so far. There is a program called Malawi Election Support Network, and it did a research on hotspots, especially persons with albinism in relation to elections. So they have just released the report. For the first time ever, we have concrete data involving persons with albinism in connection with elections. So that has been very fruitful. Eventually, it will help in terms of channeling some of the efforts towards mitigating the risk. Thank you. I just wanted to add that element.
Is it Jenny? Would you like to?
Hi, Chris.
Yes, please go ahead, Jenny. Yep.
Okay. Hi, Chris. I just wanted to make a comment based on the presentations that we have had today. Very insightful, very important presentations, which have raised a lot of strong areas in terms of persons with albinism in Malawi. My comment is on the capturing the voice of children with albinism, and also the data collection tools which have been presented by Elita and also by Tuntu. The shift in the use of ordinary interviews when we are conducting research to involving the persons with albinism themselves, the children, using pictures, using poetry, using emojis. I think this is something which in Malawi we have not been using so much, but we are moving towards that now. And it's proving to be very important when it comes to letting children with albinism themselves participate and voice out their feelings. It's important that we try as much as possible, let the children speak for themselves rather than always asking the teachers or the caregivers to express on their behalf. So I wanted to commend the projects or the studies which have been presented here for being creative and innovative in bringing and trying to use new methods like emojis in PAVE project and poetry and drawing in ELITA study. I also wanted to point out that it's indeed very important for us not just to focus on the educational implication of albinism, but also talk much on the social, psychosocial, emotional, as well as the use of media, something which was also a point of focus in Paul and Chris' study, the use of media and the implication of media on a life of a child with albinism. To what extent do they use WhatsApp, Facebook, TikTok, and how does that affect their psychosocial well-being when it comes to bullying, name giving, and all those other aspects that comes with media. So I also wanted to talk about this, that it's an important area that needs more focus on, as much as we are also interested to look at how their education academically is affected. It's important what Elita talked about, a multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary approach towards viewing the albinism, where the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Health, also Ministry of Gender and Social Welfare comes in to assist and support the well-being of these children, not just in primary and secondary school, but also consider those in early childhood centers and those who are out of school, or those who are pursuing tertiary education, because I feel like these two extremes are most of the times left out. The ECD, the early childhood development, and the tertiary, the out of school persons with albinism. So thank you very much for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you very much for your comments, Jenny. I wonder if I might call on one of the SNP's newest trustees, Bosco, because I know you've done some work in arts-led projects. Did you have any comments on that side? I could imagine you might.
No, thank you. I was literally just typing in the comment to agree with Jennifer on the methods of engagement that were used in the studies that we've seen, and highlighting the voices of the learners themselves in this space. I think it's very important. I think the only other thing that I could add there is to also see how we can effectively use similar methods in engaging those learners that are not actually going to school. In some work that I've done, I think with Makoha as well, there's a huge population of learners with albinism that are not going to school, that I think even through engaging them, we can learn a lot about their experiences and think of how best we can support them in the spaces that they live, because they still need to enjoy some of the benefits that are there for them. I think as Bonface put in the human rights perspective, and sometimes when we offer some of the interventions like the sunscreen and things like that, and mostly targeting the schools, such learners are missed out. So yeah, but it's amazing work to learn from the members that presented here on what's happening and the experiences that are there. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Esau, I see your hand is up. Do you have a question you'd like to ask?
Thank you very much, Chris. This is Esa Omale from Association of Persons with Albinism in Malawi, APAM. I just wanted to add on preventive measures that we are doing to prevent attacks or violence against persons with albinism in Malawi. Actually, in the recent project with the support from DRF, that's Disability Rights Funds, we managed to engage the motherboard of all political parties in Malawi, and that is Center for Multi-Party Democracy. So we sensitized or aware this organization so that they should have policies in all those political parties that are inclusive and protective as regards to persons with albinism. So far, we have received positive feedback from some of political parties, mainly the UDF, MCP, and DPP, that they are going to revise their policies in their political parties so that they should be inclusive and also adhere to the rights of persons with albinism in Malawi. And just to add on what the Commission of Malawi, Mr. Massah, has said, we also engaged Malawi Parliament, that's the Parliament members, mainly the Social Protective Committee of Malawi Parliament. So we sensitized them about the cases of a person with albinism as regards towards elections. And according to Malawi police data, it shows that 49% of all cases, that is 107 out of 218, do occur during elections period. So based on this data, we sensitize this political, the Committee of Social Social Affair in Malawi Parliament, so that they should make a decision that is informed based on the statistics from the police, that if we have 49% of cases happening during election cycles, that's depending on the 2 election cycles that we have in Malawi, that's from 2014 and 2019 to 2020. So they can see how these can be conceptualizing or having a concept, or people thinking that politicians, they are really involved in killings or attacks against persons with albinism based on the statistics or data from the Malawi Police Office. So through the chair, I submit my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining the meeting, and thank you for your contribution as well, and well done for your work in engaging all the different political parties in the run-up to the elections. Just to recognize Christine's comments there about work being done with fellow learners, including the bullies, to explore the views and beliefs in order to inform school-based interventions in the future. As a former primary school teacher myself, I do think it's very important if I ever had any children within our school who had any disabilities, that we, the education of the other students and understanding, the needs and so forth, and the benefit that those children would grow from. I mean, I personally had a student in a wheelchair for a year, and I had to stop all the other students from assisting her all the time because she wasn't allowed to push herself anywhere, but then the amount of support that they got and the amount of education that then trickled into the families of the school, because those learners were learning about the differences that we all have. So that is very important, and hopefully, we often concentrate on the particular target audience, or population, but we need to make sure that it is broad enough that everyone's learning along the way. I would like to, if I could, just keep on time, hand over to Stuart Brown, our CEO, to attempt to summarize what we've heard today in a few closing remarks. Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks, Chad, and we're so grateful to all of the speakers. It's a particularly relevant topic, always, but particularly now as we've heard approaching elections, with so much of the violence, abuse and attacks being linked to election times. We heard from Tuntu to start with, from CCJP, reflecting back on the terrible statistics from 2014, that over 200 people experienced attacks, persecution and death as a result of attacks on people with albinism. And Tuntu sought to explain some of the range of superstitious beliefs behind some of these attacks, and told us that there are deep societal issues involved in that. He explored the contribution that colonialism has had to this problem with the use of language and the transplantation of laws, and concluded that abuses come from multiple factors, pre, during and post-colonial times. Tuntu told us that gender is a component, with it being easier tragically for women and girls to be abducted, and also due to structural segregation. Tuntu's project found that when more socio-economic capital is available to people with albinism, they're more integrated into communities. And so their project has been working on skills development taking into account the factors of challenges to eyesight and skin sensitivity. But the workshops have been proving really successful and have been developing into business and saving and loans workshop skills development, and then leading to mentorship. And once individuals have been empowered, finding that they can pass on that knowledge, and also work around protection and access to justice, which are absolutely key. Alita told us that her PhD research is broadly on the lived experience of children and young people with albinism, but focused on two of the areas in a project, which were how to develop a sense of belonging and exploring enablers for children and young people with albinism, and how to amplify their voices, taking a participatory approach, and noted that key in the project was the involvement of the association of people with albinism in the design and looking at the safeguarding aspects of the study as well. I think that's been a common theme that we've heard from speakers, taking this really vital participatory approach involving the expertise of people with albinism themselves. We heard from Elisa some of the fascinating findings that came through the creative approaches of the children and young people being involved in sharing poems and drawings. And what came through strongly was the importance to them of a sense of belonging and safety being absolutely vital. In the primary and secondary settings, we heard that everybody that Alita and the researchers spoke to spoke of the importance of low and visual impairment and the impact of that on them. The role of peers and teachers was emphasized, and the great difference that the attitude of teachers in making some extra provision for children with albinism to be able to take part fully in classroom situations. Then there was the brilliant drawings from the girls about leading a full and inclusive school experience with drawing the trees and the fences around the football pitch, making sure that there was shade. But then very sadly as well, also reports about bullying and language labels and stigma, and there being lots of scope for improvement. The different kind of bullying that Alita heard of was gender segmented, with more violence experienced by boys with albinism and more name calling and exclusion for girls with albinism. We heard that key support can come from family, and that they are vital in providing positive labels and positive reinforcement to their children. And Alita wondered to what extent we can leverage these kind of micro levels of support, and finished by recommending the film Can You See Us on Netflix. Then we heard from Commissioner Bonface Massah, looking at how do we restore the rights of people with albinism? How do we recover from what he described as setbacks and create a positive and inclusive future for children and young people with albinism? He looked at why people with albinism are targeted as a starting point, and he referred back to a pattern, a wave of attacks across Tanzania, Mozambique, and Zambia, wondering whether it had shifted to or was already there under the surface in Malawi. They looked at Malawi's laws. They sought to strengthen the criminal justice system to ensure that there were strong and adequate legal instruments to address this, looking at all of the different stakeholders and how they interrelated, how they've been looking at when people with albinism have a voice, and spoke of the importance of them being protected to have that voice and be heard. Commissioner Massah emphasised the involvement and their involvement in, and the importance of the National Action Plan, which he told us is absolutely critical in holding governments to account. and that the Malawi Human Rights Commission and the other human rights organisations that Commissioner Massah spoke of have a key monitoring role to play. He emphasised that people with albinism must be core to the fight themselves to be and be protected to be able to do that. He said that there's a gap in the provision of immediate psychosocial support, and that needs to be addressed, the experience of the victims of attacks, to help them secure a future and to be able to enjoy their rights, something that is still missing. Then we heard from Tuntu from Standing Voice about the collaborative, multidisciplinary, multi-institutional study. And one of the initial statements was that albinism remains widely misunderstood. Again, a participatory approach involving people vitally with albinism, and looking at the challenges facing children and young people, and the implications for their psychological well-being and education towards 2030. What level of albinism literacy is there amongst parents and caregivers, and to be able to provide for the needs of young people with albinism? How can we positively change change be achieved, for multiple beneficiaries, was the other point of the study of 26 learners whose average age was 13. There was that brilliant, as Jenny in the Q&A session said, innovative use of emojis in the feedback in the learner workshops. Really brilliant to see that, to hear from the experience of the young people in the different domains of their everyday life. Dr. Chris Hand from Glasgow University, part of the collaboration, then told us that there were some reasons to feel cheerful and positive about the emotional responses and feedback that the study received from the young people with albinism. There was some negativity and neutrality, understandably, on bullying, sadly, and name calling, which seems to again be a consistent theme, and some mixed responses to the realities of their experiences with social media. But positivity around traveling and to school and the actual learning experience with the young people with albinism, ranking the importance of schooling, friends, and family with lots of consistency and agreement around that, of the ranking of importance. But real concern around their future for work and for health, post-primary and in the workplace. And then Paul emphasised that these are preliminary findings, I hope not too garbled by my trying to read my own handwriting at speed, so apologies for any mistakes that I've made here, but the videos are there in full with the speakers putting things correctly. But Paul emphasising that the study is thinking ahead to the futures of people with albinism post-primary school and in the workplace, and about the opportunity to be integrated in society. And the study is providing useful insights for the Ministry of Health, and one of the partners in the project. So thank you so much. And this has been a long-standing issue of importance, the rights of people with albinism to the Scotland-Malawi partnership. We were delighted that in one of our AGMs recently in Edinburgh, albinism rights campaigner and musician Lazarus Chigwandali joined us in person, both playing and sharing in a live interview. And Scottish human rights defender, part of the Scottish Government-funded fellowship initiative at the University of Dundee, Tumi Mepepo in 2018. We were delighted to meet her and to invite her to take part in the Malawi cross-party group in the Scottish Parliament. So thank you very much indeed for your really inspiring, in-depth and very clearly presented work on this. And Chad, handing that to you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. As I said before, no small task to summarize, but as we know, you did a fantastic job of trying to pull together all the different presentations we've had. We do apologize, we're a few minutes over, but I think considering the amount of input we've had in the last 90 minutes, it's quite impressive we managed to get all together. As I mentioned at the beginning, all the resources will be available on our past events page. You will receive an email. We would appreciate any feedback you could give us. We do here at the Scotland Malawi Partnership want to focus on impacts from these events, where bringing people together and sharing information is extremely important. But if you have any suggestions on next steps, please let us know what we could do in our collaborative pulling people together way as a membership network. I hope that you've made some contacts during this session. And once again, thank you to all our presenters, and particularly Chris for chairing the meeting and reaching out initially about having this meeting. So I wish you all a good rest of your day and the rest of the week. And thank you so much for attending today.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Chad and Dorothea.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.